Welcome to Out of the Box with Kermit Morris, a podcast dedicated to helping believers grow in their spiritual walk. Jesus wants us to look more and more like Him every day by getting out of our comfort zones. We hope this podcast will be a blessing to you as you learn to get out of your box and follow Christ. Now, here's our host, Kermit Morris.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Out of the Box with Kermit Morris. Today's episode is a very personal episode in my life. It's a moment when God kind of spoke to me in a way that changed everything I was doing and the way I approached my ministry with Him. You see, I'd started 2012, I had started an organization called Encounter Ministries. I think at that point we may have called it Growth Encounters. But at any way, we started that in 2012. I had retired and started doing intentional interims and helping churches to grow beyond where they were. We only went to churches that were kind of struggling or in trouble. And God has blessed through the years in doing that. And we've seen lots of changes take place in our life because of that. But there was a point I had in 2014, August of 2014, I had just completed an assignment that I was doing with a church in Fountain Inn, South Carolina. Excuse me. And we had been talking with them and ministering with them, and they were a church of about 25 people at that point, and they had buildings, and they were all paid for, and they got to a point where physically and time-wise, they just felt like they could not do it anymore. So we talked about the possibility of doing something called a merger, where you merge with a couple of churches. And I had been working with the North American Mission Board and with the State Convention and Greenville Baptist Association as a church planning strategist. And one of the churches that I helped plant was 5 years old at that point and had no facilities and needed facilities. And so I talked about the possibility of merging the two together. I called the pastor, Walt Tanner, and talked with him at that time about the idea, and we both prayed about it and liked the idea and started to move forward with it. Well, I had just finished a successful merger, and I'd never done a merger before, but you know, every time that God wants to grow you, He gives you things you haven't done before. And He begins to do things in your life to cause you to get out of your box and to start to grow. It wasn't easy. It was hard, but God blessed in that time and in that day. Through the process, I didn't know this at the time, but through many different processes over the years of my 51 years of ministry, I've discovered that what I think is something that the way God speaks to individuals and to groups when He wants to get something across of significance. He causes something to happen where you encounter Him in a new and special way. Well, that happened in my life at this point. Every time I'd done an intentional interim, we just said at the end of it, God, what do you want us to do next? And God would then direct us to the right place. Well, when God wants to speak, He causes an incident to happen. And the incident was fixing to happen in my life, and I had no idea what was about to take place. It took 15 months for Him to get through my hard head, but He causes that encounter. And let me just go ahead with that thought about the encounter. That's when God wants to speak to an individual or a group of individuals. Then we discover the encounter with God is a message from God, something He wants to tell us that we need to work on or we need to do. And once we have that message, we have to embrace it then as a message designed for us. And once we embrace it, then the next process is we have to engage in doing what God actually said to do. And during that process, as we engage in fulfilling God's message, we go through some tremendous experiences with God. because he's not going to leave us. He's right there with us as we go through all of those things. And so God has been working with us. He has the encounter. We embrace it. We engage in doing it. And through that process, we have some great experiences with God. And then the results, when it's over, is eternal. They won't go away. It's going to be there forever. Well, in August of 2014, I'd completed that assignment in Fountain Inn with the merger of those churches. And as usual, I just prayed and said, God, what do you want us to do next? And you know what God did? He 2 weeks later, I got a call from a church and said, we're in need of an intentional interim. Would you come and preach for us on the 14th of September? Well, that was the day that the two merged churches were coming together, but everything was in place and it all had worked out and the facilities had come together. And I went and preached for them. Well, at the end of that time of preaching for that church, they didn't call me. Now, I'd been in the ministry about 40 years at that point, and I could never remember a time in my ministry where I interviewed with a church or preached for a church that they didn't offer me a call to come. And my ego took a hit at that point. And I began to wonder, why is this happening now? We just had this successful church merger, and why is this happening? Now, you have to understand, I'm in a faith ministry. I only get paid when I'm working with a church. And so we had a little bit of savings at that point, and this was in September the 14th of 2014. And we had preached for them, and they didn't call us. So we just kept praying. But something strange was happening. As I began to pray and as Henrietta began to pray, we both felt like that our prayers were hitting the wall and bouncing back, like they wouldn't get anywhere, that I wasn't hearing God speak at all. Now, let me clarify. God doesn't speak to me in a verbal voice, but he speaks to me through feelings and through impact, through his word, and through testimony of others in my life. And so, but I wasn't hearing God. I didn't know what to do. That had never happened to me before in 40 years of ministry. And so we kept praying, and through September, through October, through November, we kept praying. But I wasn't even getting a call to come and supply preach for somebody. So I wasn't getting any income at all during that time. And I'm in this ministry where I'm trusting God, or I felt like I was trusting God, but I wasn't hearing anything. And so after that, in December, so it's been September, October, November, December now, toward the end of the month, a little country church outside of Spartanburg called me and said, we need an intentional interim. Will you come preach for us? And I thought, well, this is probably it. This is where we're going to go. And I went and preached for them that Sunday morning and felt like we had a good time together. But guess what? They didn't call me either. And now I'm getting a little concerned, and I began to say, what's going on? Why is this happening in my ministry? And so I don't have any choice but to keep doing what I'm doing. And we keep praying. Bills would come up that I could not pay, but for some reason money would come in, and we would pay that bill. And we stayed up to date, and we ate, not as well as we usually did, but we ate, and we just kept going. Well, January went by, February, March, April, May. I had a little surgery done in May, and I thought, well, God's just going to get me well, and now he's going to give me a church. June, July, and I got a call from a church in July that said, will you come preach for us? Well, I went to that church, and I'm thinking, well, I don't know what's going on. It's been a year now since I merged those churches, and I've only preached twice in that year, and both times the churches didn't call me. And so this time I called my board of directors for Encounter Ministry and said, would you meet me at such and such a church? I'm going to preach for them. to be an intentional interim? And they said, sure. And we'll go to lunch afterwards and talk about it. But I want you to look for anything you might see in my preaching and in my delivery and whatever that I'm doing wrong that's causing people not to call me. And we couldn't figure out anything. So I go preach that Sunday. My board is there. We go have lunch afterwards, and they look at me and said, we don't see anything wrong. It doesn't even look like you've been out of the pulpit for a year. It's going well, but we can't understand it. And so that church didn't call me. I'm really getting concerned now. And so I called two pastors that I know very well and know me and know my life, and sat down with them in their office, each one individually, and said, do you see anything in my life that would cause God to say, I need to take him and put him on the shelf, quit using him right now? Neither. But both of the pastors said, we see nothing. We don't know what's happening there. Okay, that's been a year now. It's September of 2015. Well, finally, at the end of November of 2015, I'm praying one night, and I hear God for the first time in 15 months. We have gone through our entire savings. We have no money. I had put in to be director of missions at a little part-time association, mainly because I needed a paycheck. Not that a feeling that God is calling me there. I needed to go to work. And so I put in there. And come to find out, I was the finalist, one of two finalists for the job. And then when I hear God speak, what he said to me, what I felt like he was saying to me, was the problem is you don't trust me. I'm flabbergasted. I'm thinking, I'm in this faith ministry. My life depends on you. I'm not getting any income now, except just every once in a while something comes in. Somebody donates to me. And God's saying, you don't trust me. God, I'm in this ministry of trusting you. And it kind of made me a little angry. There's that ego rising up again. And God said, you don't trust me. Well, it took a couple of days for me to get it worked out. But I finally realized what God was saying to me. That even though I was here, up this high, and I was trusting him for this ministry, God was saying, Kermit, I want you to be totally dependent on me. I want to be your source and nothing else but your source. I want you to go all in with me and trust me completely. Well, I took a big swallow and humbled myself and said, okay, God, I'll do it. The next day, the very next day, I got an email from an organization that trained me to do intentional interims. And the email simply said, how would you like to go to England for 6 months and pastor a church over there? And I said, man, God, you're fast. But then I read the fine print. There's no salary. I have to raise my own salary to go there. And I'm not a great fundraiser. And so I thought, well, that's out. And after I argued with God again a little bit and said, God, how can I do that? I haven't worked in 15 months. I have no income coming in. And it's going to take for me to go over there and live for 6 months and not have a salary will cost somewhere around $30,000. And I don't have that kind of money. I don't have any money. And the impression came to me again. The problem is, Kermit, you don't trust me. Finally, I said, okay, God, you open the door for me to go to England and I'll go. No strings attached. You open the door for me to go and I'll go. Well, the people from the churches in England, there was a group here in the States that sends retired pastors over there to pastor for a while. At that point, they did anyway. And they sent me 3 churches and said, one of these 3 churches is where you go. But you don't get to choose. They will choose you from a list of people we give them. So, you always have a favorite. And so I looked through that list, and there was one little church. It was an evangelical free church. And I always thought it'd be neat to pastor an evangelical free church. So I said, I want to go there. And I told Henrietta, I said, we want to go to this church. And she said, Kermit, you don't get to choose. They'll choose you. And I said, that's true. But there's nothing preventing us from asking God to help them choose us. And so that's what we started doing. Well, also at this time, 2 churches contacted me. This is December of 2015. And both of them need an intentional interim. One close by and one over in Greenville. One in Greenville had a little bit more money than the one that was close by. And I thought, well, maybe God is going to use them to help me go to England, which made sense. So I interviewed with one on Monday night and was interviewing with the other one on Tuesday night. And the one on Monday night was in real bad shape. They had hardly any money. They had a huge building that was costing them. And their pastor that they had just had killed himself. And I thought, the way we think sometimes, they can't help me go to England. It wasn't about helping me go to England. It was about, can I help them? I had 6 months because I was supposed to go in June, and this is December. And they said, I told them that I'm set to go to England in June of 2016. And they said, can you help us in 6 months? And I said, I think I can, and we'll get somebody to come in at that point to finish you up. And they said, okay. And we talked money, and it was very little there, and they offered me so much, and I said, does that give me any money to program? And they said, we think so, but I didn't, and so we cut the salary a little bit more so that we'd have some money for programming. And went to the next interview the next night, and I'm thinking in my head, boy, this one, they could really help me go to England. And the whole process of the interview, all I could do was hear God say, no, this is not the one. The first one is the one I want you to go to. So the next day, I called both churches and told them that I was going to the first one. We began to work there. I had no idea how in the world I was going to get $30,000 to go to England for 6 months. But God did. By the end of January of 2016, 2 months later, a month and a half, $30,000 was in the bank to go to England from a guy that didn't have any money, that was broke completely. God had raised the whole in $30,000 and had it in the bank ready for us to go. We began to work in the church there, and we began to see some significant things take place, some changes that were being made, and some things that were happening. We were excited about what God was doing. Well, we marched along there, and we had grown a little bit, not significant growth, but growth. And when we got to April of 2016, I got a call from England and said, the churches are ready to make a decision and just wanted to check to make sure you were still available. And I said I was still available and ready to go in June. And they said, but there's a change. And I thought, well, what's the change? And they said, one of the churches has dropped out and they're not going to participate in the program. And I asked them which church it was, and of course it was the church that I decided that I wanted to go to, that we were praying and saying, God, make them choose us. And so I was disappointed, and they said, we'll call you next week. Well, the next day I had a physical, my annual physical, and I went and had the physical done. And when I'd finished the physical, my doctor called me into his office and said, there's a problem with your PSA. It's a little high, and I want to send you to a urologist to get it checked. And he was a Christian, and I explained to him about going to England, and I said, can we do this quickly? I'm supposed to make a decision next week on whether I can go to England or not. And if you think I might have cancer, I can't go without knowing that. And he said, yes. And we called a friend of his who was also a Christian, a urologist, and we went to see him the next day. And he said, Kermit, the only way we're going to know for sure is do 13 biopsies, and we will find out. But we can't hurry that up. And so Friday of that same week, we did the 13 biopsies. Monday, they called and said, they're ready to go. Are you ready to go? And I said, I can't till these biopsies come back. And they said, well, we're sorry, but you can't go at this point. We'll wait till January and maybe you can go again. And I got to tell you that I was heartbroken, and I was thinking, God, you know everything. Why are we going through this right now? You raised the money, everything is in place, and we're not going to get to go until January. But through the years, you learn to trust God, even when you don't trust him. And so we had to wait. We didn't have any choice. Well, they did the 13 biopsies. The two churches that were left chose somebody else, and they went to England, and I'm staying there and working in the church. Well, in May of 2016, the month before I was supposed to go to England, late in the month, I got a call on a Friday night or Friday afternoon, about 4:30 in the afternoon. And it was the group from England, and they said, we have a church that is available once again, and they have chosen you and Henrietta and one other couple as their two finalists. And we want to know if you're ready to go. And I said, well, y'all had said I wasn't going to January, so no, I'm not. And they said, well, what about your biopsies? And I said, they came back all 13 benign, which I got to tell you, I was questioning God at that point and saying, why? Why did you raise the money? Why did you get us ready to go? And then this is a cancer scare, and then there's nothing there. And we couldn't go. So this church said they told us we were one of two finalists, two couples. And they said, will you pray about it, whether you're going to go or not, and let us know Monday. They'll call us back on Monday probably, or Tuesday. So I said, okay. And so I started praying. And no, I take that back. I didn't start praying. I was frustrated. This was late Friday night, and I thought I got all weekend to pray, and I didn't pray. 10:30 on Saturday morning, the phone rang again, and it was the guy from England. And he said, the church is unanimous in choosing you and Henrietta. Are you ready to go? And I said, I haven't even prayed yet. And they said, well, start praying and call us Monday. So we started praying. And we prayed and we prayed and we prayed. And every time I would pray, all I could hear God saying was, you told me if I opened the door, you would go to England. So I called them on Monday and said, I'll go. But I said, I have one question. They said, what? I said, where are we going? You didn't tell me where the church was. And he started laughing. And he said, the church that dropped out is the church that came back in. and they're unanimous in wanting you in Henrietta. The church that I had asked God to make them choose us, chose us. But God knew what I didn't know. And he knew that if I hadn't had that cancer scare, I would have taken one of those other churches. And this church was the church I was supposed to go to. And so he arranged all of that to keep us available for them when they became available for us. So God worked it all out. And God said, this is where I want you to go. Bootle Baptist Church, our Bootle Evangelical Church. And we went and had a great ministry there. But the whole point is, no matter where you are in your spiritual walk, in your spiritual growth, God says, I want a little bit more, and I want a little bit more, and a little bit more. We never, ever arrive. We have to always be going up a little bit to be more like him in everything we do. Hence, that's why we have this ministry called Encounter Ministries. That's why we do what we do, because we know God is always wanting us to look more like Jesus Christ in our walk. Now, I know, you know, we're never going to achieve that here on this earth. But this is not our home. Heaven is our home. And one day, we will be there, and one day, we will look like him. But in the meantime, we got to keep getting out of our box and growing and stretching and beginning to look more and more like him. Trust. It's something that's very vital. If he is our all, he is everything to us, we have to trust him. We can't second guess. We can't look back. We just trust him. Whatever he says do, folks, we have to do. We have to move forward and trust God. And when we do, God grows us and helps us to become what he intended us to be all along. That's what we're all about at Out of the Box. We have to get out of our comfort zone, get out of our box, and grow in Jesus Christ. Well, our time's up today, but we're going to spend a couple of more weeks talking about trust and how do you trust God. When Henrietta and I first got married, God gave us a verse, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. It says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not into your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. God wants you to grow, and he'll direct your paths. For the next 2 weeks, we're going to talk about Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, and trusting God and letting him direct where we go and what we do. I'm Kermit Morris. This is Out of the Box with Kermit Morris, and we'll see you next week on Out of the Box with Kermit Morris.